Hello, I'm Edward October. Over the years, I've narrated more ghost stories, horror shows, and creepypastas than I can count. And yet, the crimes discussed on our true crime podcast managed to scare the shit out of me. This program is not suitable for children or the faint of heart. If you are such a person, go ahead and switch off this podcast. Listen to something else. Are you still with us? Well, we've warned you.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, Kim. How you doing?
I'm good. I hear this is our last episode before we start our 12 Nightmares Before Christmas.
I think you heard correctly.
I think that's correct. So,
I know. Can you believe it?
Nope. So this would be the last regular episode of the year of 2023.
Yep. We will be back at you after the Nightmares Before Christmas on January 10th, I believe.
Back to your regularly scheduled programming of Kim and Jan all day long.
Kim and Jan.
And Jan.
Yeah, just a nice little break. I think we deserve it. We've published an episode every week this year. Can you believe that?
This is terrible. Sundays are a wash for both you and I because
that's when we record.
I would say starting in September, October, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have to keep up with the regular episodes and then throw these in there too. So yeah, it's a lot.
Yep, a little burnout maybe. We deserve the break. We're excited, but we're going to miss you.
Yeah, we will.
But
and then
you've got the 12 days. Yep.
And we'll both stare at the computer because we forget how to do this and we both mess up. And that is
and our editor, Nico, just cries. Yep. But anyway. All right. What do you have for us?
Here we go. This is something else. I tell you, I know we always talk about people and what drives them. But then you get someone like this fella and you think, what are you thinking? Like, you'll see.
All right,
you'll
tell us.
Go with me. You ready?
Quit
Here
talking.
we go.
Stop yapping. Let's get to it.
So today we are heading to Akron, Ohio, specifically to the Sherbondy Hill neighborhood, where families are actively engaged in their lives and upbringing of their children. Now, this well-established neighborhood is home to a diverse group of middle-class families, ranging from elderly residents to brand new parents. Stanley Ford is one of the neighborhood's oldest and most respected residents. Stanley spent his entire life in the house where he grew up, but after his mother passed away, he purchased the home next door. He subsequently married Zanetta, a teacher, and Stanley, who was a part-time mailman, had very strong religious beliefs, and he was very dedicated to his family. He was the devoted father to his 2 young daughters, and he saw himself as an exceptional neighbor, always ready to lend a hand, whether mowing lawns or raking leaves. He believed he was responsible for ensuring the neighborhood's safety and monitoring the community. Another longtime resident, Lindell Lewis, and his girlfriend, Gloria Hart, lived across the street from Stanley. Now, much like Stanley, Lindell was a devout Christian who had retired from his career as a master bricklayer. Now, recently, he had undergone hip replacement surgery, and Stanley often assisted him when needed. The neighbors enjoyed a great relationship, but this harmony would soon be disrupted. Lindell decided to help a man struggling with drug addiction, and, this really reflected his nature. He was very compassionate. He was always willing to try to help the underdog, if you will. He agreed to let this man, whose name is Thomas, stay in the basement of his home until he could get back on his feet. Now, Stanley, however, could not have been less enthusiastic about this idea. He was uncomfortable with strangers in his neighborhood, feeling they might disrupt the tranquility he so cherished. One night, Stanley was awakened by a loud party at Lindell's house, with blaring music and a large gathering of people. Some of the attendees were drinking, and others were using drugs. Lindell was known for his friendly nature and often initiated such gatherings. On the other hand, Stanley viewed this behavior as sinful and unacceptable. The following morning, Stanley decided to visit Lindell to express his concerns, and that's to put it nicely. Stanley informed Lindell that he was unhappy about the new roommate and he believed he should leave. Lindell, however, urged Stanley to give Thomas a chance, explaining that Thomas was attempting to get his life back on track. Stanley was convinced he was right, and he set out to prove it. He researched Thomas on the internet and uncovered some troubling details, which, of course, he rushed over to share with his neighbor. Now, this neighbor's name is Chester Williams, and when Chester answered the door, Stanley shared the information that he had found out about Thomas, specifically some burglary charges. Stanley hoped to gain Chester's agreement and support in removing Thomas from the neighborhood, but Chester had a different perspective, and he was not willing to cooperate with Stanley. Now, that perspective would change drastically overnight as he awoke to find his vehicle had been broken into. Chester then contacted the police to report the incident and installed a security system on his house to monitor the neighborhood. Now, although Chester's neighbors hoped that this was an isolated incident, their hopes were soon shattered. Across the street, Stanley was peacefully sleeping when he heard a disturbance in another room. Upon inspection, he was shocked to discover a man crawling through his window, and he suspected this man was Thomas. That's right, Thomas, the one that he wanted to kick out. A confrontation ensued, with Stanley accusing Thomas of breaking in, and of course a denial from Thomas. The two would actually break into fisticuffs. They got into a fight, and the police had to come and intervene. Lindell offered to pay for the broken window, but it didn't resolve the underlying issue. So Stanley decided to install video cameras on his property as well.
Little
Neighbors
neighbor
just
tiffs.
not liking each other.
Yep. Thank God they didn't use the Nextdoor app. But that'd be fun to read.
Yeah, right. And can you believe this? At a later point, a woman from Lindell's house approached Stanley, and he accused her of being a sex worker who propositioned him. Now, this led to a confrontation where Lindell revealed that she was actually Ronald's girlfriend. Ronald lived in the basement with Thomas. Now that Stanley is learning that Thomas has another roommate named Ronald living in that basement, who he can only imagine is on the same caliber of Thomas, if you will, a recovering drug addict or troubled soul, and that his girlfriend had propositioned him, Stanley was beyond unhappy. Now, Bev, another neighbor, joined Stanley in desiring changes within the neighborhood, particularly regarding the frequent visitors at Lindell's house. And these visitors came various times of all through the day and most of the night. Now, Stanley felt like the guardian of the street. That's, he was sort of the guardian angel. That's what he liked to refer to himself, warning neighbors that if Lindell didn't address the situation, he would. Now, Lindell attempted to figure this problem out. And this is his resolution, which is unique, ? So Lindell went and bought a minivan. That's right, a minivan for Thomas and Ronald to use instead of assembling the little party on the porch. They would assemble the party in the minivan. Yeah, that's right.
So instead of sitting in the porch, that he wanted them just to sit in the van?
Yeah, so it wouldn't bother Stanley as much.
Okay.
Now, Stanley, of course, saw this as problematic, and he believed it just further facilitated illicit activities. If they're still doing it, they can just do it a little bit more privately in that minivan. Well, wouldn't you know, a day or two later, both Lindell's home and the van were vandalized. Now, of course, Stanley thought Lindell did this on his own. Lindell, of course, thought Stanley did it. So they're going back and forth, blaming each other for the issues. A few days later, the situation escalated as that party van was set on fire. What? Yeah, the party van was set on fire, and who knows what was in it. It probably did go up in a blaze of glory. So, of course, both men are now really at each other, demanding that Stanley did this. I know you did this. Lindell's like, you're going to have to do this. Well, no, that's just not good. Things are just not going well. If you remember earlier, I said Lindell had underwent a hip replacement surgery, and this really did limit his mobility. Gloria, his girlfriend, became his primary caregiver. But, the surgery prevented him from doing a lot of things, including participating in the neighborhood gatherings that they would often have. They'd have little street parties and things like that. Tragedy struck on April 18th, 2016, when a fire broke out in Lindell's house. Thomas and Ronald were downstairs. They managed to escape, but Lindell and Gloria were trapped on the second floor and tragically perished in the flame.
Oh.
Now, he couldn't walk. He couldn't get down the stairs without a lot of help. And so they were up there. Neighbors were yelling at them to jump. And he's like, I can't, because of his hips.
That's heartbreaking.
It's horrible.
A horrible way to go. Mm-hmm.
Detective Troy Looney took charge of the fire investigation, and a critical breakthrough came from the K-9 unit. Go doggy. The burn patterns indicated that there had been a deliberate use of an accelerant. This made the incident, of course, go from accidental fire into a chilling case of double murder. Investigators turned their attention to Thomas, the one that survived the fire, which, of course, that would only make sense. Now, Thomas maintained that he had not witnessed anything suspicious before the fire, but he did point out the neighbor, Stanley Ford, across the street and said, you might want to talk to this guy. Now, all the neighbors are outside. They're, shocked. They're talking about this. The fire's still going on. It's still raging on. Firefighters are there. Everybody's out there. But one person was conspicuously not there. Stanley Ford. So all the neighbors, when your neighbor's house is ablaze, I'm sure you're going to run outside with all the ambulances, fire trucks, police cars, As family members gathered at the scene, some individuals stood on Stanley's property, observing the tragedy in disbelief. Stanley eventually emerged from his house, and not to offer his condolences or to see what happened. No, he reprimanded these intruders for trespassing on his lawn.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
How old is he? He's get off
older.
My lawn age.
Yes, but not that old. His wife still works as a teacher, and he's got a young daughter. I think she's around 8, if I remember correctly.
Huh.
So detectives questioned Stanley about his whereabouts before and during the fire. He remained resolute in his claims that he had slept through the entire incident and had observed nothing unusual or suspicious. Now, while denying involvement in the fire, Stanley did hint at the possibility of divine intervention. That's right, suggesting that perhaps God had chosen to address the situation. Now, that situation, of course, was what he perceived as Lindell having people that were not worthy of living in his neighborhood, I guess is how you could say that.
So God struck them with fire.
Yes, that's how he believed.
Okay.
Because he, both Lindell and Stanley were devoutly religious. And so you'll see
Very
this.
Old Testament, but yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see this come up again and again. Detectives, however, maintain their focus on scientific evidence rather than matters of karma. The investigators wanted to get a look at that surveillance footage from Chester Williams as well as Lindell's cameras. They wanted to get a look at that. And ultimately, this would provide their first crucial clue. In Chester Williams' footage, an individual can be seen on the screen, and he is heading towards the Lewis residence. It's a very chilling thing to see this from Lindell's camera footage. So from Chester's, you can see across the street somebody walking toward Lindell Lewis's house. But when the police officers got Lindell Lewis's footage, you actually have close-up footage of that person and what they're doing. And the footage shows this. You can see an individual approaching the front door of the Lewis residence, saturating it with some sort of substance, which we now know is highly flammable, setting it ablaze, and then rapidly making their escape. When comparing this with Chester's footage, it becomes apparent that the same person that they had seen walking in Chester's footage is also the same one that went to the Lewis house, set it on fire, and then subsequently ran from Lewis's house, and then again catching back up with Chester's camera, and you can see him running away from the opposite direction of Lewis's house. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm, it does.
It's a lot, but it'll come together in a minute. So at this point, the evidence, they need to talk to Stanley. They're starting to think maybe he's a suspect. Still, as detectives dove into Lindell's history, many potential suspects emerged and introduced a few new avenues for them to go down. This all started with Lindell's ex-wife, Francine. It was discovered that Francine had a life insurance policy on Lindell, her ex-husband, and this little fact was unbeknownst to him. Okay, a little weird. Investigators approached Francine to inquire about her potential involvement in the fire, to which she denied any wrongdoing. However, when asked to undergo a lie detector test to exonerate herself as a suspect, she adamantly refused and expressed her displeasure at even being considered a suspect. Now, this frustrated investigators and raised suspicions regarding her potential involvement of the case, which we all know it is your right. You do not have to take a lie detector test. You don't have to do any of that. However, a lot of the times when you deny that and you don't want to do it, that doesn't look very good on you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. More potential suspects are coming up to the surface. Francine's boyfriend became a person of interest because he drove a car that was similar to the one that was observed driving up and down the street right before the fire. There's also Ronald, Thomas's roommate, who also drew attention due to his drug use, leading to the idea that maybe he owed money to a dealer who sought repayment that night and ended up setting the house on fire instead. However, Ronald's defensive and uncooperative behavior only intensified the investigators' focus on him. He was, if you haven't caught the drift now, Ronald's the drug dealer, and, Thomas had a little drug problem, and they're living in the basement. McLemore was a former house guest of Lindell, and he was another suspect that came to light. Investigators had discovered that McLemore and Lindell had a recent falling out. McLemore had given Lindell some money to hold for him, pretty much saying, whatever you do, don't give this to me, because if you give this to me, I'm going to go spend it on drugs. Well, that's exactly what was about to happen. One night, McLemore came to Lindell's house late, demanding all the money back, and Lindell refused. He said, absolutely not. You asked me to do this. I'm helping you to help yourself. So, of course, investigators are thinking that possibly McLemore was angry and came back to set Lindell's van on fire out of anger, and then he also might be the one responsible for the house fire.
Sounds about right.
There's a lot at play here. So despite having a pretty good amount of evidence, including the footage of the arsonist on video, the case lacked sufficient evidence to convict or arrest any of the identified suspects. They needed more. So at this point, the neighbors, and I can only imagine, they're not looking at each other as friends or even neighbors, but suspects in a double homicide, because I think that they know that somebody in their inner circle must have been responsible for Lindell and Gloria's death. As the case remained unsolved, Stanley continued to be a vigilant protector of his neighbors, and that included Bev Ewing. I mentioned her earlier. Now, Bev had some concerns about her new neighbors, Anthony Sams and his young teenage son, Devontae. Stanley reassured Bev that, I got you. I'm going to keep a watchful eye on you and your house and your car and them, because, he is part of the neighborhood watch. Or really, I think Stanley thinks he is the neighborhood watch.
He can be. I mean, he's watching.
Yeah, he is. But Stanley's vigilance extended beyond the safety of his neighbors right there that were close to him. He had his eye on another house in the neighborhood that had just come up for sale, and he had plans to make it his own. So he's, preparing all the necessary paperwork for the purchase of the home. I mean, ideally, this would have him owning 3 houses on a street. What better way to control what goes on than to be the one that buys the houses up and then you control who lives there? Now, as he's getting all this paperwork together, talking to the bank, talking to his loan officer, all that good stuff, his dreams were dashed when he discovered that someone had beaten him to the purchase. This, of course, left him a little upset. His plan did not come into play. Now, usually, Jen, people would accept the loss and move on. But as we have learned, not everyone is normal.
Very few are.
Dennis Huggins and Angela Boggs eagerly move into their new home. And they just want to create some cherished memories as they bring their blended families together and watch them grow. Angela had 2 children from a previous relationship, is now joined by the 4 children she and Dennis share. 17-year-old Brittany, 14-year-old Jared, 6-year-old Deja, 5-year-old Kyle, and 3-year-old Olivia. And then there's the youngest, little cutie pie, 16-month-old Cameron. Now, Dennis was once an electrician, but instead now he is the stay-at-home dad, while Angela pursues a career as a dialysis technician. You'd have to have somebody stay at home. That's way too many kids for daycare.
Exactly.
You'd be broke.
You would be broke. You'd just be working to pay for daycare.
One Sunday, following a church service, Stanley and his family pay a friendly visit to the newcomers. Stanley discovers that Dennis grew up in the church just like he did, and it seems like their families share common ground. However, this would change late one night when Stanley stumbles upon something that alters his perception of the new neighbors. Stanley would often walk in the neighborhood late at night, sometimes early in the morning, keeping an eye out, because that's what he did. He would take these little customary neighborhood rounds, I guess, make them, if you will. And one night when he was doing this, he was coming around the corner, approaching Dennis Huggins' residence, when Stanley witnesses Dennis exchanging something with a car parked in front of his house. Concerned, Stanley confronts Dennis, questioning whether he was involved in drug dealing. Now, given Stanley's strong stance against substance use, Dennis clarifies that it was just a transaction with a friend involving a small amount of marijuana. Despite Dennis insisting that he only sells to close friends and is far from a major dealer, Stanley doesn't like it, and this places Dennis on his watch list. Up next, Stanley starts to target Jared, the eldest son of the Huggins family. Stanley becomes convinced that Jared is responsible for a series of car break-ins in the neighborhood, and this has been going on for the last couple weeks. One day, Stanley follows Jared home, and it's in the afternoon, after school. Stanley confronts the young teen, unleashes a, diatribe on him, you could say. He's, pretty much yelling at him, lecturing him. Dennis hears this from inside the house, and he's like, no. So he intervenes, stepping outside to see what the heck is going on. Stanley says, hey, this is my neighborhood, and I want this to end. Well, of course, my neighborhood, I want this to end, does not set well with Dennis. A neighbor would step out, kind of break him apart, and say, hey, we're not going to do this. This is silly. So, okay, for a little bit, we have some calm. Days later, when Stanley was on his customary neighborhood watch evening walks, he stumbles upon something that really gets his suspicions going. He sees two young teens, you know them, that darn Jared and that darn Devontae, and it looks to him like they're breaking into a car. Okay, Stanley is furious. When Jared returns home, Jared recounts all of this to his mom, and he explains to his mom, you have to take this with a grain of salt because they are kids. But Jared claimed we were only looking in cars. We weren't breaking in them. We weren't doing anything. We were just looking into them. I mean, in reality, they weren't breaking the window when Stanley came to see them. Nothing like that.
They were just scouting out the car.
Kind of. Being nosy, maybe. I don't know. Uncertain what to do about this or how to fix the situation or address the situation, Angela is left with this little dilemma. Is her kid doing this? Is he not? And how do they deal with the neighbor that's, they're new neighbors?
Mm-hmm.
But Angela's also a little bit worried because that Lindell house fire has still not been solved. It's very, the cases run cold. Now, this is a little close to her because, let's just say she has a little fear of fire. And this is why. This is horrible. Angela, you see, had a little traumatic incident with her ex-husband, Patrick Boggs. Patrick, at this time, was serving a 12-year prison sentence for domestic violence. And this is why. He took Angela, put her in the bathtub, doused her in kerosene, and tried to set her on fire. That's right. So he ended up getting 12 years for that. So she's a little...
Only 12 years.
Yeah, that's it.
Attempted murder.
She's obviously, and of course she would be, she's a little worried about the person that set that neighbor's house on fire and that they haven't been caught. Now, Patrick, sadly, has recently been released on parole. So Angela's very, she's on the edge of her seat all the time. She's looking for anything that seems out of the normal. She's fearful he's going to come back and finish what he started and failed to finish. Tis the season for giving and get-togethers.
Woohoo!
And with HelloFresh, it can also be the season of saving. No joke. You can actually save money while having fresh recipes delivered to your door. And it's cheaper than takeout.
Mm-hmm.
With pre-portioned ingredients, you'll never waste money buying more food than you'll use.
And seriously, I had to go to the grocery store to buy some spices for a recipe that I did last week. And it added an extra $20 to my total bill. And I'll probably never use those spices again.
Yeah, really. We've said it many times before. HelloFresh is the best thing we've ever done for ourselves and our family. We get farm fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to us. There are no trips to the grocery store, and HelloFresh has made home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit.
HelloFresh has over 45 recipes and more than 100 seasonal add-on items to choose from every week. So it's easier than ever to find something that even your pickiest eaters will enjoy.
Oh, and do I know something about pickiest eaters? I have one. And he has yet to find a meal that he doesn't just love.
And holiday hosting, it can't get any easier with HelloFresh. You can add a crowd-pleasing charcuterie board or a photo-worthy dessert. And let me tell you, the cheesecake is incredible.
Yum!
And just add it to your weekly order and bam, all the work's done for you. You just get to sit back and enjoy your guests. And honestly, for the past 2 years, my husband and I have ordered HelloFresh extra stuff for our New Year's Eve get-together. And I'm telling you, it's the best. The guests love it. All I have to do is open it up, just put it on my plates or whatever, and bam, it's heaven.
You always get so many compliments, too.
I do. That's one of the best parts, by the way. And you know what? We know you're going to love HelloFresh just as much as we do. So we're going to offer you one heck of a deal.
This really is a fantastic deal.
It is. So go to HelloFresh.com/OTCP free and use the code OTCP free for free breakfast for life. That's one breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/OTCP free with code OTCP free.
So as all of this is going on, you still have Stanley that's fuming over Devontae and Jared. So he decides he's going to have a little talk with Devontae's father, Anthony. I think that discussion didn't quite go the way Stanley had envisioned it.
It never does.
Never does. Because Anthony, the father, he had been drinking a little bit that day. So he was a little drunk, and I'm sure he did not want to deal with Stanley and his shenanigans, especially hearing bad things about his son. So soon the encounter escalates into a scene of yelling and screaming, and then finally reaching a boiling point. Anthony demands that Stanley leaves the property, forcefully kicking him off his property. That is not going to be too good. That's not going to be good because, Stanley doesn't like to be told what to do in quote unquote his neighborhood. So every Sunday, family and friends gather at Dennis's house for a little get together. It's a little barbecue after church. And Dennis, look at them. They have a ton of kids, but then they also have a ton of friends. Dennis has a ton of brothers. They have a large family. So sign me up. I think it'd be really fun, by the way.
It would be fun.
So at the parties, usually the adults take care of the barbecue and, they grill all the food. And then the kids just run around and scream with laughter and delight, which of course probably drove some of the neighbors crazy. But it's just fun and it's just an all-day thing. And, every week the size of the crowd would vary depending on who would show up. Sometimes people just swing by. Some people would be there all day long. For Stanley, these gatherings, he did not like it. It triggered memories of the Lindell house, where he perceived that there was undesirable people loitering and engaging in activities that go against his principles. So Stanley's unease and disapproval of these parties do not go unnoticed. Of course they don't. Stanley, overwhelmed by his suspicions, begins shouting accusations at the partygoers. Now, can you imagine this? He was screaming things that was not occurring, like you guys are all doing drugs, you're all having illegal relationships, you're all just basically obscenities and things like that.
I'm sure the neighborhood just hated him.
Could you imagine?
No.
I can't either. I just can't. This is just my ad lib, but she seemed like a nice person, so I'm sure she was at her wit's end. Which brings me up to this. As Stanley is getting increasingly louder and louder with his yelling and all this stuff, his wife is getting pretty upset. And she's, basically yelling at him to rein it in, come in. You don't know what you're talking about. Stanley, you need to come in and sit down. So this is all taking place. And I'm sure I don't even know what to think about if I would see all that. I'd probably go in and hide because let me correct.
You'd hide.
I'd go in and hide because that's me. But I would be peeking out that window like there's no tomorrow because I'm nosy.
You'd be embarrassed.
I would be. So one day, Stanley, he's at home. He's just sitting down. As you can see, this is kind of choppy, but this, as all things, it unfolds, tempers boil and then they really spill over. So Stanley's sitting in his house one day and he spots Devontae cutting through his yard one night and nope, you're going to have to get off my grass. Stanley runs outside to confront the teen. He instructs Devontae that he needs to find a different path and to quit trespassing on his property. Well, of course, he's a kid. This kid's like 15, 16 years old. He's like, I'm not going to. Basically says, you know what? I can do what I want. I have the right to do what I want. You can't tell me what to do. That kind of thing.
That 16-year-old attitude.
That's exactly right. Well, here's where things take a little dark turn. Stanley quietly utters a threatening phrase, telling Devante, quote, "I will body you." Now, if you don't know what that means, because of course I didn't either, it basically implies that you're going to kill the person and put them in a body bag.
Oh.
And ironically, I was watching a TV show today and somebody said that too. So I was like, I guess it is a thing. I didn't know. Well, needless to say, when a grown man threatens a teenager's life, that's not going to go over great. Now, is it? Mm-mm. So just a couple days after that, the neighborhood, once again, wakes up in the middle of the night to the sight and smell of smoke as Anthony and Devante's car was the next target of arson. Somebody set Anthony and Devante's car on fire. I know. Emergency services, including firefighters and police, respond to get rid of the fire. And when they're there, they had determined that the fire was, of course, intentionally set. And this is evidenced by you ready? The rag that was placed into the gas tank and lit.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's no mistake in that, let me tell you. Now, Stanley Ford, which I can only imagine is creepy, is standing just down the street watching all of this unfold. And he's just standing and watching from afar. And it's just awkward. Everybody else is running up. Everybody okay? And it's just he's standing and watching as if almost like I did that, right? Or I have control of this. I don't know. Whatever one thinks when they're standing down the street staring at something awful like that taking place and not doing anything. So with all this going on and with all this going on in the neighborhood, Dennis and Angela decide to take a little break and visit family. They are going to Florida, where Dennis's grandmother and mother had recently relocated. Now, the children are unaware that this trip is more than just a family vacation. How fun is that to go on vacation when you're a kid? It's so fun. But it's actually a scouting expedition for Dennis and Angela because they're starting to think about the idea of moving to Florida, which would be great for the kids, but also then they'd have family close by. But they wanted to go down there, visit the area, see if they like it before they made that decision. Needless to say, they loved it. When they get back to town, Dennis and Angela make an announcement to the family. They have decided to relocate to Florida. Surprising the kids with the news, their move, the kids are thrilled. Think about that. The beach, Disneyland, Disney World, whichever one's down there.
Disney World.
Yeah, it's so fun, right? So the family is so excited that they're about to start a new chapter in their lives, leaving behind this neighborhood, which had a promise for a fresh start. Yeah, it just didn't go quite as nicely as they thought. So Dennis puts the house back up for sale. Now, Stanley should be happy because maybe he can go and scoop that up again, right? It's now Mother's Day, 2017, when the Huggins Boggs threw a party to celebrate Mother's Day. Of course, Stanley is none too thrilled, so he makes his way to the house to share his disdain and gets sidetracked walking there. It seems that there were a couple outside checking out their car, which had been broken into. Stanley told them it was the Huggins Boggs family, which he did not know to be accurate, of course, but he said he will fix this issue. So Stanley went back home, and basically he just stewed over all of this, and just stewed and waited.
He's got nothing to do with his life, does he?
Nope. After the guests had all departed from Dennis and Angela's house, and the clock struck midnight, the family was fast asleep. The scent of smoke abruptly wakes Angela. Panic-stricken, she gets Dennis up to rush to gather their children, while Angela dials 911. To her shock, the call fails to connect, leaving the family trapped on the upper floor as the flames start to consume the main level of their home. The scene obviously is chaotic. Concerned neighbors rush outside upon hearing the distressing screams from the window. The house is now fully engaged in fire. One of the neighbors quickly dialed 911, and they're hoping for a swift response. However, their anxiety heightens as the first fire truck arrives. And are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
It's a 10 minutes, till they arrive there. When they get there, they attempt to connect the hoses to the nearest fire hydrant, only to figure out it was non-functional.
What?
It had not been looked at after that first fire about a year ago, the Lewis house. So desperate, they go out trying to find another fire hydrant, which is 2 blocks away. This, of course, is it allows the fire to basically devour the house.
That's horrible.
By the time firefighters manage to establish a water source, The residence it's just pretty much done. The intensity of the fire renders it impossible for any firefighters to go in, leaving all of them just standing there, helpless, looking at this house, realizing that there's people inside.
Unreal.
The devastating aftermath of the house fire leaves the community of Akron, Ohio, in shock and mourning. The loss of Dennis, Angela, and their children, Jared, Deja, Kyle, Olivia, and baby Cameron, is an unimaginable tragedy, and also makes this the deadliest house fire in the city's history. The family dog also perished. Only Brittany, the eldest sibling, escaped because she was actually not in town. She was out of town for work, so she was not home that night. The community is they're devastated. They don't even know what to do with this. They've lost this entire family. This is the second house fire resulting in death on one street within a year.
With one common denominator.
That's right. Given his connection to fire-related incidents, the investigation at first focuses in on Patrick Boggs, who had recently been released on parole. That was Angela's ex-husband. Discovering that Patrick had a parole violation, they bring him in for questioning. Patrick stuns his cellmate by confessing to the crime. He claimed responsibility for the fire that took out Dennis and Angela and all their children and the family dog. Investigators get search warrants for Patrick's place. And in the meantime, fire marshals make a chilling discovery. You see, Patrick had claimed that he started the fire by using coals from that barbecue they had that day, that he had taken the coals and set up a trash can up against the house, and that pretty much set the house on fire. But that actually was not correct. The fire marshals had learned that the house had been doused with accelerants once again and set ablaze. But this time, the accelerants were strategically placed to prevent escape. So basically, they were put on, points of exit so that the family would not get in there. Now, Patrick's false confession was basically driven by hatred towards his ex-wife. Again, this loses some valuable investigation time for the detectives. But now they need to find out who did this. The neighbors hold a vigil for the family, and everyone shows up for their support, especially Brittany. Poor little Brittany. She's lost everybody in this fire. While everyone is gathering and mourning, Stanley Ford approaches Brittany and hugs her, and he says, quote, "I am so sorry this happened to you. I don't know who would be sick enough to do it. I hope they find who did this and they rot in jail." As the investigation continues, authorities realize that this fire looks a lot like that Lewis fire, which happened only a year ago. Both were set from the outside, both used accelerants, both got the fire going extremely hot and intense, more so than just your typical, say, wiring fire or something like that. Once again, detectives head over to Chester Williams' home, hoping that, hey, a year ago you had those cameras and we were able to catch somebody that set their house on fire, but we never could figure out who it was. We're hoping you still have those cameras. Chester Williams, of course, says, "Oh, yes, I do, and here you go," and provides them with some footage.
Go Chester.
As investigators review the tapes, they are shocked by what they see. They see, it sounds oh so familiar, Jen, they see a man walking past the cameras headed towards the Huggins-Boggs home. Minutes later, that same individual is seen running in the opposite direction. They're shocked at how similar this footage is to the one that they had in the Lewis fire. They were sure that the same person is the person responsible that set both of these fires. In each video, the man walked the same and was about the same height and same weight. Detectives head over to the Fords. Detective Looney again sits them down, and just like before, Stanley is less than friendly. The detectives asked if they knew the fire was burning, and his wife, Zanetta, told the detectives that fire woke her up, actually. And he then asked if Stanley was awake as well. Stanley said no, he was asleep. That's important. Zanetta then looked at Stanley rather oddly, as if to say, "No, you weren't."
Go Zanetta.
Of course, Detective Looney picked right up on that. And he said, "Stanley, I think we might need you to come down to the station and we just, have some things to maybe talk to you about, maybe ask you." Stanley, nope, not going to the station. Okay. So we're going to play a different game there, Stanley. Detectives decide to monitor Stanley's comings and goings and even videotape him to see how he walks in comparison to the person on the videos on both nights of the fire, which is kind of ingenious, I think. So that the policemen, they go to talk to him and try to get him to come down to the station. And on the videotape, he's like, you guys are acting like I'm a suspect. But the police officers like kind of following him around to make sure to get good angles of him walking, right? Like that's pretty smart. 3 days after the fire, a search was conducted for both of Stanley Ford's homes. And one thing that they find is some lighting fluid that Stanley claims is not his, and he doesn't know how it ended up in his garage. Okay, but the best discovery was yet to come. You see, Stanley had installed an alarm system at his mother's house and his house, the ones he owned. And upon playing with it a little bit and experimenting with it, Detective Looney discovered that this small little device could potentially provide a crucial clue. That alarm meticulously recorded each time it was armed or disarmed, complete with a time stamp. Even more significant was that its data storage capability reached as far back as that first fire, back a year ago, the Linda Lewis fire. See where this is going?
I do.
Technology for the win again. The alarm revealed that on the night of the Huggins Boggs fire, the alarm was disarmed at 2:27 a.m. Within seconds, the mysterious individual can be seen walking toward the Huggins Boggs home in that same familiar gait that he used as he walked. Confident about identifying the culprit behind the fire, authorities apprehend Stanley Ford. In the interrogation room, detectives try to get a confession from him regarding the murders of the 9 individuals. Now, initially, Stanley, of course, denies it, but when presented with the videotape, he acknowledges that he does like to take walks at night. You know, that probably was him, and it just happened to coincide with maybe the time of the accident. But he did not have anything to do with that fire.
Sure he doesn't.
So even though Stanley does not confess to initiating the fire, investigators believe they have sufficient evidence to proceed and arrest him and basically take him to trial for this heinous crime. Well, here comes our good friend COVID. That's right. The old COVID pandemic comes and the trial is delayed for 4 years.
That friend ruins everything.
Finally commencing in August 2021. Now, throughout the proceedings, prosecutors present side-by-side comparisons of the videos that they had just to kind of illustrate to the jurors to see this. And it is pretty remarkable because essentially it's the same darn video. It really is. It's the same video. I can't even tell you. And they want them to see the sequence of events and how this unfolded. For instance, the porch light at the Ford's house turns on. It illuminates. Followed by an unknown individual entering the frame, heading towards the soon-to-be burning house. Then, minutes later, returning back to the Ford's residence. And then all of a sudden the porch light goes off. Now, that timeline also matches the disarming and arming of the security system that they had. So, I mean, basically, he just gave them the exact time up to the minute of when he did this. Summit County Prosecutor Joe DeAngelo laid out the motivations behind the actions of 62-year-old Ford. Ford allegedly expressed strong aversion about his neighbors in each of the fire incident. He made statements portraying Lewis's house as a den of inequity, claiming that prostitutes, that's his word, not mine, plied their trades inside the home, and the homeowner's buddies sat on the front porch drinking alcohol. Ford also allegedly called his neighbors from across the street bad people and said they stole everything and were bothersome to everybody. Those are all quotes too. He also ranted again that prostitutes were dealing in homosexuality, that they did drugs, and that the people at the home were not his friends because of his standards, and that one of the men at the home wanted to see how long his penis was.
Oh.
He alleges that a man asked to see how big his penis was, which I guess bothered him quite badly since it made the trial.
It's not a normal question you'd ask someone, so.
It is not. Both the prosecution and the defense expressed concern about Ford's mental state in the lead up to the trial. In January 2020, a judge ruled that despite being diagnosed with vascular dementia and brain damage, Ford was deemed competent to face charges. Ford articulated that a conspiracy theory suggesting that his defense, the prosecution, and the judge were colluding all against him, as the Akron Beacon Journal reported. That's what he said. Did you catch all that? Did that make sense? Following his arrest in May of 2017, Ford contacted Cleveland-based broadcaster WEWS to assert his innocence. However, he declined to appear on camera or answer specific questions about the case. Now, buddy, you can't call the newspaper and say that you're innocent, you didn't do this, and then say, no, I'm not going to go on camera, or in fact, answer anything you have to ask me.
But you can, but...
You can.
Yeah.
You did, apparently. So, yeah, you can. But, yeah, it just doesn't look so good for you. In his opening statements, D'Angelo portrayed Gloria Hart as a retiree who had dedicated her entire life to working at a local factory, and Linda Lewis as a bricklayer known for being a good friend to many. The prosecutor told jurors that they would hear about some of Lewis's associates being rough around the edges. Specifically, D'Angelo pointed out that Thomas Hughley, who managed to escape the first fire, did not dispute his strained relationship with Ford. The prosecutor also mentioned allegations that Hughley had, in fact, broken in to Ford's home. Ford's attorney, Scott Riley, attempted to propose alternative suspects, specifically regarding the home of Lewis and Hart. Riley suggested that a history of drug-related issues, non-payment to dealers, and other conflicts, along with unrelated incidents of arson, was to blame. Ford told investigators regarding the Huggins Boggs home that people engaged in marijuana use and that the residents had people coming and going all the time. He accused the children of engaging in destructive behavior, such as kicking vehicles and breaking rearview mirrors. Ford also claimed that a neighbor named Paul informed him that the boys had attempted to poison Paul's dogs. None of that was really proven here,
right,
true or false. The jury reaches a verdict of guilty. Stanley Ford is sentenced to 9 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He received an additional 21 years for the attempted murder of Thomas Hughley. And what is interesting in here, in his court trial, in the video from his court case, I guess, he's still adamant that he's innocent. He still does not understand that he had anything to do with this, but also that it was sort of karma or God, if you will. Like, he didn't. So he attempts to kind of voice this to the judge, and the judge is like, nope, no. You had your chance to speak. You've spoken enough. You're done. You don't, nothing. So he is still in jail today, prison rather. But wow. I just cannot believe that somebody can get so upset that you kill them.
I know.
He knew that Louis Lindell could not get out of that house. He knew Gloria would not leave Lewis's side. He knew that. So he knew what he was doing.
He knew the whole time.
Purposely, killing I just don't understand how come.
Just another reason to go move out without any neighbors.
It's just crazy. And it's just, I don't know.
Cold.
I mean,
and then to say
cold.
that it was an act of God on top of all of that.
Well, I think that's because I said, how could you live with yourself? And I think that's how he did it.
Yeah, he just said that it was an act of God.
Yeah, he would tell himself that so that he could live with himself doing that. And he just, we've all had some unsavory neighbors. I had a neighbor in California who shall remain unnamed. Her name's Clara. And she was a couple things. So my sister came out to visit one time. This was the worst experience ever. My sister came out to stay with me from Missouri to California when I lived in California. And I went to work. Clara knew that. Clara knew that I was gone at 9 o'clock. So my sister laying on the couch, kind of dozing off, watching TV, just woke up. Clara lets herself in my house. My sister's like, excuse you? Well, she had no idea my sister was going to be there, which we know is illegal. You can't do that.
Was she a landlord?
Nope. She was not a landlord.
Oh.
No, she was not. She was my neighbor who had taken it upon herself. She was Stanley. She was Stanley of the neighborhood. She had bullied our landlord into, you give me a key and I'm going to keep an eye on all this. She was
That's highly illegal.
Mean. We had the windows open on a Sunday afternoon watching football. I don't like football. Okay. So it was just on the TV. She starts screaming in our window to shut up. She went through my trash and commented that I drank way too much Diet Coke. And I was like, how do you know that? And then she realized that, because I was like, I think somebody went through our trash because it was all, just, she went through our trash. She went and talked to these neighbor girls. And then one morning, it was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm getting ready for work. Get a knock on the door. I open it. It's her. She starts screaming at me, wanting to know if I talked badly about her to the neighbors. And I'm like, I haven't even met the neighbors yet, so I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it was a different neighbor that talked badly about her to them because she was nuts, and this is what she did. I cannot tell you the stress. Like, it was just the most bizarre thing ever. It was bizarre. I don't even know.
No, I don't even talk to my neighbors. I talk to the one right next to us. We watch their cats, but other than that, we don't talk to anybody. I like it that way.
Well, it's best that way. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was not, you move in, I don't know. It's just, so she was the Stanley, not to this degree.
Extent, thank goodness.
But still insane. But the landlord wasn't much better. One night, now this was LA.
Well, he gave your key to somebody. No, yeah, that's highly illegal.
Even this, check this out. This year was it was so stressful, like my hair fell out. It was 1:30 in the morning. And this is LA city proper. Like we are one block off of Wilshire. So we're like right in LA. Like we had bars on the windows on the first floor, if that tells you anything. But in LA, a lot of people do that. So that's not a big deal. We were right by the Peterson Automobile Museum, which is where Biggie Smalls was shot and killed, by the way, if you want to know where this is. Anywho, so we're sitting there and I hear something and I'm like, somebody's breaking in. And then I'm like, wait, they turned on our faucet? What? It's 1:30 in the morning. What are they doing? So I peek out the window, and there's a guy out there watering our bushes at 1:30 in the morning. So I scream out there, and I'm like, what are you doing? Because, I was on the second floor. Thank goodness. Well, he's our landlord. His daughter's getting married the next day, and he's not going to have time to water the lawn. And I'm like, you water the lawn? It's LA. Like, it's never even that hot. What do you? So I was like, we called the police. They're going to be here. So can you please stay here so that you can explain this so we don't look like we're insane? And he's like, yeah. He hightailed it out of there.
Of course he did. Yeah.
I mean, that was like the whole year of living. I don't even know. Crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, this is insane.
Yeah. I remember that year. That was great. We moved out. So.
Ooh, it's terrible. Anyway, so
now we learned to move out in the middle of the country where you don't have any neighbors.
No, but then you got other issues because the podcast, there's trouble lurks everywhere, Jen. We know now.
It does.
So anyway, that's this Stanley kind of reminded me of Clara.
Yeah.
But Stanley just telling everybody what to do and how to do it,
Craziness is all around us.
Really is.
What can you do? Well, that's the end of the last regular episode of our True Crime Podcast for this year.
2023 comes to an end.
And in the next couple days, on the 13th, we start our 12 Nightmares Before Christmas episodes. One episode a day until the 24th. It's like our little advent calendar to you. And then we'll be back on the 10th of January.
January 10th. That is correct.
2024.
2024. Jen, we have any promos this week?
We do. It is our friend Edward with October Pod. He's got a new Christmas episode coming up. And of course, it's going to be fabulous. So here is his promo. And if you do anything that we say all year round, do this. It's like and subscribe to Edward October for October Pod VHS, which is on YouTube, and October Pod AM, which is just a podcast, and it's on all your podcast apps. So we absolutely love Edward. We think he's the greatest. If you don't know, Edward is the one who does our listener discretion at the very beginning.
He's the man.
And he does most of our promos for us.
Yes.
Really, he's a phenomenal man, and he does all of it out of the kindness
because he loves Jen and Cam.
So, I know. So, anyway, listen, it's going to be excellent. And
that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Good. Check it out. All right, Jen. I guess until next year. Wow, that sounds weird saying that.
It does.
2024. We will see you later. And remember, lock your doors.
Keep passing by those open windows.
Bye-bye.
Love ya.
Today's episode was researched and written by me, Cam. For more information about this episode, as well as all the sources I used, please check out our show notes or the podcast website at ourtruecrimepodcast.com. Our True Crime Podcast is developed and created by hosts Jen and Cam. Original music and audio mix of all our True Crime Podcast episodes is courtesy of Nico Vertesi from We Talk of Dreams. Listener discretion is provided by Edward October from October Pod VHS. Our True Crime Podcast is executive produced by Nico Vertesi and Dick Vane. Make sure to like and subscribe to Our True Crime Podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. We can be reached on Instagram and Facebook at Our True Crime Podcast or on Twitter at Our True Crime Pod. You can email us at ourtruecrimepodcast@gmail.com. If you really like the show, make sure to check out our Patreon at Our True Crime Podcast. Our True Crime Podcast is an OTC production.
I'm Edward October. Ask any bold individualist and they'll tell you. All you need for a perfect eggnog is to combine egg yolks, beaten until creamy, egg whites, beaten until fluffy, heavy cream, a generous portion of fresh ground nutmeg, and an even more generous portion of liquor. Most people use dark rum. I prefer bourbon. The final two ingredients are essential. A cozy seat by the fire to sip it, and a ghost story, told as only Octoberpod can tell it. This year, Octoberpod's gift to you is a Christmas ghost story that can easily be called a classic of the medium. It drops on December 25th, Christmas Day. Find it on our YouTube channel, Octoberpod Home Video, or on Octoberpod AM, wherever you get podcasts. You can find all of our links at octoberpodvhs.com. Listen by the fire, and we guarantee it will be the crowning pleasure of your busy holiday season. After all, eggnog without a belt of good hooch is hardly eggnog, and Christmas without an Octoberpod ghost story is hardly Christmas. Octoberpod, Yuletide horror for bold individualists.